Picture this, the year 2187. Earth isn't the blue-green jewel it once was. It's a graveyard of forgotten tech, a planet buried under mountains of shattered screens, rusted drones, and the hollow shells of machines that once promised a brighter future. Scavenger crews pick through the wreckage like vultures, surviving on whatever scraps they can salvage. But in this sea of discarded dreams, something impossible is about to change everything. Deep in the ruins of an old orbital transit yard, engineer Lira Kova stumbles upon a relic that shouldn't exist, a derelict alien warp core, half buried under centuries of junk. And when she brushes the dust from its surface, it hums to life, whispering a phrase that sends chills down her spine. Light is not the limit. Those 5 words crack open the door to a reality humanity never dared to dream. For generations, we believed light speed was an unbreakable barrier, a law written into the fabric of the universe itself. But this alien artifact, it laughs at our limitations. It hums with secrets older than our civilization, promising a way to slip past the cosmic speed limit like a ghost through a wall. And Lira, she's holding the key. But she's not the only one who knows it exists. Word spreads fast in the scavenger underworld, and soon every power-hungry faction on Earth and beyond is hunting for her. Corporate mercenaries, rogue militias, even the remnants of old-world governments, they all want that core. Because whoever controls it doesn't just control a piece of alien tech. They control the future. This isn't just a story about a ship built from trash. It's about what happens when humanity's desperation collides with its boundless ingenuity. When the people written off as junkers and outcasts dig through the rubble of a broken world and find the tools to build a new one, because Lira and her crew, they're about to attempt the unthinkable. They'll take that alien core, strap it to a vessel welded together from scrap metal and defiance, and point it at the stars. And if they succeed, they won't just outrun light. They'll rewrite what it means to be human in a universe that's far bigger and far stranger than we ever imagined. So buckle up. This is the story of how the Forgotten Ones built a ship from garbage and left the laws of physics in their dust. The flames licked at the night sky as the Rust Hawk's hideout collapsed behind them, its walls buckling under the weight of corporate plasma fire. Lira's fingers tightened around the warp core in her arms, its eerie blue pulse bleeding through the gaps between her fingers like liquid starlight. Around her, the crew coughed through the smoke, Soren with a bleeding temple, Vex clutching a fractured wrist, all of them staring at the one thing that just cost them everything. "This isn't salvage," Lira muttered, voice raw. The core thrummed against her chest, vibrating in time with her heartbeat. "It's a key, and every power-hungry bastard in the system knows it now." Soren wiped blood from his brow, teeth gritted. "So we smash it, bury the pieces where no one, or we use it," Lira cut in, eyes blazing. The core's glow flickered across her face, casting jagged shadows. "Think about it, this thing doesn't just break the light barrier, it laughs at it, and we've got enough scrap in the junkyard to build something that could carry it." Vex let out a sharp laugh, gesturing to the burning wreckage behind them. "With what, our charm?" But Lira was already moving, her mind racing faster than the fire chasing them. She'd spent a lifetime piecing together ships from garbage, rewiring dead circuits back to life. Every bolt she'd ever salvaged, every stripped engine plate, it was all leading to this. Not just a ship, a statement. One by one, the crew fell in line. They'd lost their home, their gear, their safety. But in the glow of that alien core, they saw something else, a chance to stop running. To punch a hole in the universe and fly straight through. So while the corporate dogs sifted through the ashes, the Rust Hawks vanished into the ruins, armed with nothing but a stolen future and a pile of scrap. The greatest ship ever built wouldn't come from a factory. It would rise from the bones of a broken world, and it would leave the laws of physics choking on its exhaust. The boneyard they called home became a forge overnight, every scavenged hull plate and gutted power conduit pressed into service under the orange glow of cutting torches. Lira moved between rusted skeletons of old freighters like a ghost, her fingers tracing fractures in the metal before marking them with spray paint. This section still good, this one to melt down, this one to weld to the frame. The ship took shape in stolen moments, its spine cobbled together from the ribs of 3 different decommissioned crawlers, its skin patched with armor plating pried from a derelict security outpost. They called it Phoenix not just because it rose from trash, but because every piece carried the scorch marks of a world that tried to burn them first. Soren Jory rigged the propulsion system using repurposed fusion batteries, their cracked casings leaking coolant as he rerouted power lines with hands still bandaged from the firefight. "It'll hold long enough to get us off-world," he growled, wiping sweat from his eyes. "After that, pray the core does what that alien engraving promised." The crew worked in shifts, sleeping in rotated 2-hour bursts between welding and wiring, their faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. Every clang of metal echoed too loud in the abandoned hangar. Every spark from the grinders felt like a beacon shouting their location to the sky. Then Jax walked in. The betrayal came wrapped in a familiar grin, the same one he'd flashed when sharing rations during the famine of 2185. "Heard you lot were building something special," he drawled, kicking a loose gear across the floor. Lyra's hand drifted to the wrench at her belt. "You're late for the party," she said, voice flat. "We ran out of invitations." Jax just chuckled, tapping his ear, a transmitter blinking red. "Vera's offering 5 million credits for that shiny toy in your hold." Alive. The word alive hung in the air like a threat. By dawn, the bounty transmission crackled across every pirate frequency in the system, Vera's synthetic voice slicing through the static. "Bring me the core intact and the crew's corpses are optional." The Rust Hawks didn't bother packing. They welded the last hull panel in place as the first corporate drones breached the outer tunnels, their new engines screaming to life in a storm of sparks and half-calibrated thrust. The Phoenix lifted off not as a finished ship, but as a barely contained explosion, a middle finger stitched together from scrap and spite, with an alien heartbeat thundering in its belly. Somewhere behind them, Jax's laughter turned to static. Ahead, only the stars and the void waiting to be cracked open. The alarm klaxons howled like wounded animals as Vera's drones descended in a black cloud, their engines screaming through the Junkyard skeletal towers. Lira didn't bother looking up. She could feel the vibrations of their targeting systems locking onto the Phoenix's patchwork hull. "Mining lasers," she barked, tossing a severed power coupling to Rook. "Reroute them through the dorsal array before those things carve us open." Rook's hands flew across the console, fingers dancing between wires that sparked protest as he hotwired decades-old industrial cutters into something resembling weaponry. "This'll give us 1, maybe 2 shots before the whole system fries," he snarled, slamming a fist into the ignition panel. The Phoenix shuddered violently, its engines coughing plumes of rust-colored exhaust as it lifted off the ground in a lurching spiral. Outside, the first drone's plasma beam sliced through the air where the ship's tail had been seconds earlier, igniting a fuel drum in a geyser of fire. Soren clung to the makeshift gunnery station, a repurposed cargo crane with the mining laser bolted to its arm, and let out a roar as he squeezed the trigger. The beam lanced out, erratic and untuned, but it clipped a drone's wing, sending it careening into its neighbor in a shower of molten debris. "You call that a weapon?" Vex yelled from the engine pit, her arms elbow-deep in coolant lines. "It's a glorified hairdryer." Lira gripped the core's housing, its alien metal searing her palms through her gloves. The drones were adapting now, weaving through their frantic shots in ominous synchrony. She knew Vera wasn't just watching, she was learning, calibrating her swarm to their desperation. Every second in the air was borrowed time. Then the Phoenix's starboard thruster sputtered and died. the ship listed violently, throwing them all against the bulkheads as the drones closed in for the kill. Rook wrestled the controls, veins standing out on his forehead. "We either jump now or we're scrap," he bellowed. Lira didn't hesitate. She wrenched open the core's access panel and jammed a frayed cable into its pulsating heart. The ship screamed around them, every welded seam straining as reality itself seemed to buckle. The last thing they saw before the light swallowed them whole was the drones disintegrating against an invisible wall, not because the Phoenix had outrun them. Because it had rewritten the rules. The Phoenix didn't so much land as it did crash into existence, reality spitting it back out near Mars in a shower of sparks and groaning metal. The jump had been less a calculated leap and more a blind stumble through the fabric of space. Lira's jury-rigged wiring sending them hurtling through dimensions the core wasn't fully calibrated to navigate. Every panel on the ship screamed in protest, alarms shrieking as the warp core's hum dipped into a dangerous, erratic whine. Outside the viewport, the red dust of Mars filled the horizon, its barren wasteland stretching beneath them like a warning. Then the comms crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel, this is Martian orbital defense. Power down engines and submit to scan or be fired upon." The voice was crisp, military, utterly unprepared for the sight of a ship that looked like it had been cobbled together by madmen. Rook, still gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity, let out a wild laugh. "Oh, this is rich," he wheezed, thumbing the comms open. "Martian boys, you're looking at the fastest trash in the galaxy. Try to keep up." Silence. Then, a burst of static as the patrol ship's weapons systems whirred to life, targeting lasers painting the Phoenix's hull. Lira didn't wait for diplomacy. She slammed her fist onto the engine override, the warp core flaring back to life with a sound like a dying star. "Strap in," she snarled. "We're not done breaking physics today." The Phoenix lurched forward, its patchwork engines howling in protest as it skirted the edge of another jump, this one even more unstable than the last. Behind them, the Martian patrol opened fire, plasma bolts tearing through the space where the ship had been a heartbeat earlier. But the Phoenix was already gone, vanishing into the void like a ghost, leaving nothing but a ripple in the fabric of reality and the echoes of Rook's laughter hanging in the vacuum. Somewhere in the chaos, Vex caught a glimpse of the warp core's readout. The numbers made no sense. They hadn't just broken the light barrier, they'd shattered it. And the core was just getting started. Martian security forces swarmed the Phoenix before its landing gear could fully deploy, magnetic clamps locking onto its battered hull with a chorus of metallic shrieks. Lira had just enough time to wrench open the warp core's casing and slam a jury-rigged stabilizer module over its pulsing heart, turning the most advanced piece of alien tech in human history into something that looked like a half-melted power regulator. "Play dumb," she hissed to the crew as armored boots pounded up the boarding ramp. Soren promptly slumped against the wall, clutching his head with theatrical agony. "Oh, the space sickness," he groaned, while Vex kicked a pile of loose wiring over the core's disguised housing. The Martians weren't amused. Their commander, a humorless woman with a scar cutting through her eyebrow, scanned the ship's patchwork interior like she was inventorying a crime scene. Junkyard, thieves, and a ship held together by wishful thinking, she muttered, motioning for her squad to cuff them. But when Dr. Elson arrived, a wiry man with grease-stained lab coat and eyes that lit up at the sight of broken things, everything changed. He circled the Phoenix like a kid at a candy counter, fingers brushing over weld seams and makeshift conduits with something between awe and horror. "You rebuilt a Mark 7 cargo loader's thrusters to handle ion surges," he murmured to Rook, who blinked in surprise. "That's suicide," Rook shrugged. "Worked, didn't it?" Then Elson found the core, or rather, he found what Lira had let him find, the stabilizer cover, its edges still warm. His fingers lingered a beat too long, his breath catching. When he looked up, his voice dropped to a whisper only Lira could hear. "The stabilizer's a clever lie." But the oscillation patterns, he tapped his wristpad, pulling up a star chart flickering with crimson dots. Vera's fleet mobilized the second you jumped. They're carving through every outpost between here and Jupiter looking for you. His gaze locked onto hers. You've done the impossible, now you need the unthinkable. Lyra's pulse spiked, which Elsin's smile was all teeth. An alliance with the people who hate Vera more than you do. Outside the hangar bay windows, the distant orbital docks shimmered home to the Belt Reapers, the most ruthless pirate faction this side of Saturn. And as the security team hauled the crew toward detainment, Elsin slipped a frequency chip into Lyra's palm, his final words curling like smoke. Tell them you've got the key to burning Vera's empire to the ground. The air in the Martian safe house tasted like recycled oxygen and paranoia. Lira counted 12 armed rebels in the dim lighting, each eyeing the rust hawks like they were either saviors or walking corpses. She couldn't tell which. Dr. Elsin moved through the room like a ghost, his fingers dancing over a holo projector that flickered to life, painting the ceiling with a star map littered with crimson flares. Vera's fleet, he muttered. Every ship she's got is hunting you, and she's not just burning through fuel, she's burning informants. A rebel with cybernetic optics leaned forward, her voice a blade. She's got someone inside this room. The silence that followed was thicker than Martian dust. Lyra's hand drifted toward her wrench, her crew shifting subtly into a defensive circle. Elsin's jaw tightened. We can give you cover, safe passage to the belt, but you'll need to. The explosion tore through the back wall first, a concussive roar that sent bodies flying. Lyra hit the ground rolling, her ears ringing as debris rained down. Through the smoke, she saw figures in Vera's black and silver armor pouring through the breach, their rifles sweeping the room. Someone screamed, someone else fired back. Elsin grabbed her shoulder, shoving a data chip into her palm hard enough to bruise. Core stabilization protocols, he rasped, blood trickling from his temple. It'll buy you minutes, not hours. Run. Then he was gone, lunging toward the rebels as the ceiling groaned overhead. Lyra didn't hesitate. She yanked Vex up by her collar, shouting over the chaos, scatter and regroup at the Phoenix. Soren was already moving, dragging Rook through a side vent as plasma fire chewed through the walls. The last thing Lyra saw before diving into the tunnels was a rebel's face, not fear, not rage, but cold calculation. The traitor, and they were still breathing. The Martian underground was a maze of rusted pipes and flickering emergency lights, every shadow a potential ambush. Lyra ran with the chip clutched like a lifeline, the warp core's pulse throbbing in her skull like a second heartbeat. Stabilization protocols might keep the core from tearing the ship apart mid-jump. But first, she had to live long enough to plug it in. The warp core's hum deepened as Lyra slotted Elsin's chip into the Phoenix's cracked console, its files unfurling across the screen in jagged alien glyphs that resolved into human-readable text, then into something far worse. Numbers, equations that made her vision swim, physics were written in symbols that burned themselves into her retinas. It's not a propulsion system, she whispered, fingers trembling over the display. It's a keyhole. Rook leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the flickering diagrams. So the aliens who built this thing, what got bored of speed limits? Lyra tapped a sequence and the screen split, one side showing the core's standard jump protocols, the other revealing layers of code buried beneath, pulsing like a trapped heartbeat. They didn't just break light speed, they folded space like paper, punched through dimensions we don't even have names for. Her throat tightened, and Vera's dreadnought. It's built to chase ships that obey physics. Soren let out a low whistle, tracing a glyph that twisted like a snake eating its own tail. So we don't outrun her. We make her guns irrelevant. The words hung in the air, too big for the Phoenix's cramped interior. Then Vex, silent until now, reached past Lyra and zoomed the display onto a single line of text, an alien warning, its translation glitching in and out, containment failure equals unraveling. Yeah, and if we screw this up, she muttered, stabbing a finger at the diagram's crimson-edged core schematic. We don't just die, we take the solar system with us. Outside, the comms crackled to life. Martian patrols reporting contact. Vera's dreadnought had just cleared the asteroid belt, its engines painting the scanners a hateful shade of violet. Rook cracked his knuckles. Guess we'll have to be careful then. His grin was all teeth. After we blow a hole in reality. The core pulsed in agreement, its hum deepening into something hungry. Lira exhaled, her reflection warping in its glassine surface. They weren't just holding alien tech anymore. They were holding a conversation, one humanity was barely qualified to whisper back to. The Iron Crown didn't so much arrive as it did eclipse Mars, its obsidian hull blotting out the stars as it slid into orbit like a knife across her throat. Vera's flagship was a monument to human arrogance, 5 kilometers of coiled weaponry and glistening alloy, its railgun ports humming with barely restrained fury. When her transmission crackled across the Phoenix's comms, it wasn't a demand, it was a coronation. Surrender the core, Vera crooned, her voice syrup smooth, and I'll make your deaths quick enough to be mistaken for mercy. Lira's reply was a finger on the thruster control. The Phoenix shot forward like a startled bird, its welded wings screeching as it weaved between the dreadnought's escort drones. You want it, she shouted over the open channel, banking hard to avoid a salvo of plasma fire. Catch us. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a riot in zero gravity. The Phoenix jerked and shuddered through jumps so short they barely qualified as teleportation, flickering in and out of reality like a strobe light. 1 second it was skimming the Iron Crown's dorsal spine, close enough for Soren to spit on its hull. The next it was 500 clicks starboard, its warp core belching radioactive steam as the crew fought to keep it from tearing itself apart. Vera's gunners scrambled to adjust, their targeting systems screaming in protest as physics itself became a moving target. Then the universe remembered it hated them. A grazing shot from a plasma cannon kissed the Phoenix's portside thruster, and suddenly the ship wasn't flying. It was tumbling, spinning wildly toward Saturn's rings like a drunk thrown from a bar. Alarms howled. Vex clung to the cockpit ceiling as artificial gravity flickered, her cursors lost in the din. Rook wrestled with the controls, his arms shaking as Saturn's amber gaze filled the viewport. Stabilizers are fried, he barked. One more jump and this heap's coming apart like a... Lira didn't let him finish. She grabbed the core's manual override and twisted, flooding the ship with a surge of alien energy that made the very atoms in the air scream. The Phoenix vanished again, not into the void but through it, tearing a wound in space that bled light like an open artery. When they reappeared, Saturn's rings weren't below them. They were inside them. Ice and rock pummeled the hull, each impact a thunderclap as the Phoenix carved a drunken scar through the debris field. Somewhere beyond the chaos, the Iron Crown's sensors would be screaming, its crew staring at the empty space where their prey had been. But Lira wasn't thinking about Vera anymore. She was staring at the core's readout where a new set of glyphs pulsed like a warning or an invitation. The aliens hadn't just built a way to slip past the light barrier. They'd left a trail, and it didn't lead to the stars, it led under them. The Phoenix's hull groaned like a dying beast as it plunged into Saturn's rings, ice and rock scoring its battered plating with a sound like 1,000 knives dragged across metal. Dex's hands flew over the engine console, his voice raw over the cacophony. Hull integrity at 30%, one more scrape and we're a floating coffin. Lira didn't flinch. She braced herself against the shuddering bulkhead, her gaze locked on the swirling chaos outside the viewport, a storm of frozen shrapnel glittering in the pale gold light of distant Saturn. Then we don't scrape, she said, teeth bared, we fly. The maneuver was madness. Saturn's rings weren't just debris. They were a gauntlet of razors moving at orbital speeds, a million tiny blades waiting to flay the ship down to its bones. But Lira wasn't aiming for the gaps. She was aiming through the storm, using the warp core's erratic pulses like a drummer setting the rhythm for a death-defying dance. "Rook," she barked, "angle the starboard thrusters to graze that ice cluster. Use the melt-off for cover." Rook's laugh was half terror, half exhilaration as he wrenched the controls, the ship's belly skimming so close to a house-sized chunk of ice that frost spiderwebbed across the viewport. For a heartbeat, the universe held its breath. The Phoenix trembled on the edge of disintegration, its welded seams screaming as ice impacts rattled the crew like dice in a cup. Then miraculously, the warp core's pulse shifted, its erratic hum smoothing into something like harmony. The chaos outside seemed to slow, the ice parting around them not because of evasion, but because the core's energy was bending space itself, nudging debris aside like a hand brushing away sand. When they burst clear of the rings, the Phoenix was no longer a dying hunk of scrap. It was a comet trailing stardust, its warp signature stabilized into a shimmering blue wake that stretched behind them like a road through the void. Dex stared at the readings, his face washed in disbelief. "You insane genius," he breathed. Lira collapsed into the pilot's chair, her hands still trembling from the grip she'd had on the core. "Nah," she muttered, watching Saturn shrink behind them, just desperate enough to listen when the universe whispered back. Behind them, Vera's dreadnought hesitated at the ring's edge, its sensors blinded by the storm. Ahead, only the dark and the trail they'd left burning through it. The Phoenix's engines stuttered back to life just as reality itself seemed to unravel around them. One moment they were gasping in the aftermath of the Saturn dive, the next light years away, the stars smeared into unrecognizable streaks across the viewport. But something was wrong. The warp core's pulse, usually a steady blue, now flickered crimson at its edges, its hum deepening into something that vibrated the crew's teeth. Lira pressed a palm to its casing and yanked it back with a hiss. "It's hotter," she breathed, "like it's been." Fed, Vex finished, her eyes wide. She pointed to the damage radar the thruster hit, the ring debris impacts, even the plasma graze from Vera's dreadnought. Every near catastrophe had left a mark. But not on the ship, on the core, Soren cursed, pulling up the jump logs. "Look at the energy spikes. Each time we almost died, the core didn't just recover. It grew." A chill settled over the cockpit. The aliens hadn't just built a machine. They'd built something alive, or close enough, a thing that thrived on chaos, that drank terror like fuel. Lyra's fingers hovered over the controls. "It's learning," she murmured, "and the more we risk, the more it." The proximity alert howled before she could finish. Vera's fleet shouldn't have been able to follow, not this far, not this fast, yet there they were, a dozen sleek hunters materializing from the void, their warp signatures glowing the same sickly violet as the Phoenix's latest jump. Rook slammed a fist onto the console. "They've synced their drives to ours. Everywhere we go, they..." "No," Lira interrupted, staring at the core's newest readout. The glyphs had changed again, not a warning this time, an invitation. The core didn't just want risk, it wanted purpose, and it was offering them a choice: keep running or turn the hunters into the hunted. Outside, Vera's ships fanned out, their weapons charging. The Phoenix shuddered, its patchwork hull groaning, but the core, it purred. The chase wasn't just escalating. It was evolving, and the rules were whatever the core decided to break next. The distress signal was so faint it barely registered, a whisper of alien harmonics buried in the static between stars. The Phoenix shouldn't have caught it, no human ship could have, but the warp core twitched in its housing, its pulse quickening like a hound catching a scent. And suddenly their navigation array lit up with coordinates that hadn't existed a second earlier. "That's not a beacon," Vex muttered, her fingers hovering over the console. "It's an echo." The derelict station hung in the void like a broken tooth, its architecture all jagged angles and spiraling walkways that defied gravity. No lights, no power signatures, just the signal looping endlessly from its corpse. When the Phoenix docked, the airlock hissed open on its own, not a mechanical sound, but something wetter, like a gasp. Inside, the walls were webbed with organic-looking tendrils that pulsed faintly, as though the station itself was dreaming. Then the holograms flickered to life. Not recordings, echoes, figures of the core's creators materialized mid-stride, their movements frantic, their faces twisted in something between awe and terror. One collapsed, clawing at its chest as its body unraveled into strands of light that the tendrils absorbed hungrily. Another screamed soundlessly into a comms device before dissolving mid-word. Lyra's stomach turned as the truth clicked. This wasn't a research outpost, it was a tomb, the last hologram, a being with too many joints turned as if seeing them. Its mouth moved, the translation software spat out a single phrase, glitching with age. The core chooses, it always chooses. Then the station's AI awoke, its voice slithering from the walls in fractured galactic common. "You carry the hunger now," it rasped. "It will hollow you out to make room for itself, just as it did them." Soren backed toward the airlock, his rifle raised. "Explain." The AI's laughter was the sound of glass breaking. "You think you control it, you are sustenance. It lets you run so you can lead it to richer prey." The tendrils around them began to throb faster, their glow deepening to crimson. "This station was its first meal. Your species will be the next." They barely made it back to the Phoenix before the station's self-destruct sequence triggered. Not an explosion, but an implosion, matter collapsing inward like a dying star. As the wreckage vanished into the dark, Lyra stared at the warp core's readout. The energy spike from their near-death experience hadn't faded, it had grown. Vex's voice was hollow. "So, we're flying a goddamned predator." Lyra didn't answer. She was too busy counting the ways the core's pulse now matched her own heartbeat. Dex's fist came down on the console hard enough to crack the screen. "We dump it," he roared, veins standing out on his neck. "Right now, into the nearest black hole." Around him, the crew flinched not at the outburst, but at the way the warp core's glow flared in response, its hum dipping into something disturbingly like laughter. Lyra didn't move from her seat, her fingers steepled under her chin. "And then what?" she asked, voice eerily calm. "Vera's fleet still exists. The core's tech is already in her hands. If we don't finish this..." "Finish what?" Dex whirled, shoving a trembling finger at the view screen where the derelict station's debris still floated. Becoming its next meal, the vote was swift, brutal. Vex sided with Dex, her hands shaking as she keyed the airlock override. Soren stood silent, his rifle cradled like a promise. Only Rook lingered near Lyra, his usual smirk gone. "You really think we can control it?" he murmured. Not a question. Lyra met his gaze. "I think it's letting us try." The proximity alarms screamed before the argument could spiral further. Vera's fleet didn't bother with hails this time. Their opening salvo turned the Phoenix's starboard shield generator into molten confetti. The ship bucked violently, throwing Dex into a bulkhead. Lyra lunged for the helm, her hands flying across the controls as the core's pulse surged in anticipation. "Brace for jump," she shouted, too late. The detonation rocked the station's docking arm, shearing it clean off. Rook, halfway to sealing the hatch, took a shrapnel burst to the chest. He crumpled without a sound. Soren dragged him back as the Phoenix wrenched free, the core howling like a living thing as it tore reality open. By the time the ship stabilized in the jump's wake, Rook's breathing was a wet, ragged thing. Next time, he coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I'm flying." Vex pressed a wad of synth gauze to the wound, her face grim. Dex stared at the core, then at Lyra. No words left, just the silence of a choice already made, and the uneasy knowledge that whatever the core wanted next, they were out of options to refuse it. The Phoenix's oxygen recyclers wheezed like a dying asthmatic, their filters clogged with 3 jumps worth of cosmic dust. Lyra watched the gauge dip into the red, her reflection warped in the glass, a ghost with sunken eyes and a jaw set like flint. Around her, the crew moved in slow motion, their steps heavy with exhaustion. Vex's fingers trembled as she injected the last dregs of stims into Soren's neck. Dex cradled Rook's shivering form against the reactor's residual heat, his whispers lost under the ship's metallic groans. Then Lira tapped the star chart. The holodisplay flickered, zooming past known space, past the wreckage of the derelict station, past even Vera's hunting grounds, until it settled on the ragged edge of the galaxy itself, where stars bled into the abyss. There, she murmured, where the core's signal burns brightest. Dex's laugh was a broken thing. You want to feed it the void. Lira turned, the warp core's glow painting her face in feverish blues. No, she corrected softly. I want to ask it what it is. The silence that followed wasn't doubt. It was the quiet before a leap into darkness. Rook coughed blood into his palm, then grinned. Fitting, he rasped. Trash ship meets trash physics. The jump sequence wasn't like before, no frantic calculations, no desperate reroutes. Just Lira's hand hovering over the core's activation node as the crew locked eyes. One breath, two, then reality screamed. The Phoenix didn't move through space. It carved into it, the core's energy flaying open dimensions like layers of rotting skin. Outside the viewport, stars stretched into smears of light, then snapped like threads. The crew's screams harmonized with the ship's groans as gravity twisted, their bones vibrating at frequencies no human body should recognize. And the core, it sang, a sound beyond pitch, beyond noise, a melody woven from the fabric of broken universes. Lira felt it in her teeth, her marrow, the spaces between her cells. This wasn't a machine obeying commands, this was something listening. When the Phoenix finally wrenched itself free, the view outside wasn't black, it was empty. Not the absence of light, the absence of everything, no stars, no dust, just an endless, hungry nothing pressing against the glass. And then, from the depths of that void, something pressed back. The Phoenix lurched out of the void like a drunkard stumbling into daylight, its hull wailing under the strain of the last jump. The black hole loomed ahead, not a distant cosmic threat, but a yawning maw close enough to see the light bending around its edges, time itself twisting like taffy. The ship's chronometers flickered between dates centuries apart, while the crew's heartbeats stuttered in their chests, caught between too fast and too slow. Then the warp core screamed, a sound that wasn't sound, and the view screen erupted with light. A holographic map burned into the air, Earth, Mars, and a third point pulsing crimson. Vera's homeworld, but it wasn't the coordinates that froze Lira's blood. It was the lines connecting them, not flight paths, firing solutions. It's not just a drive, she whispered, her throat raw. The core's hum deepened, vibrating through the deck plates like a predator's growl. It's a weapon, one shot, and Soren's grip on his rifle tightened. And Vera knew, the pieces snapped together with the cruelty of a bear trap, the derelict station, the alien warnings, the way the core had goaded them, used them, letting them think they were outsmarting Vera when all along. Rook coughed, his voice thin with pain. She wasn't chasing us for the tech. He tapped the map and the projection shifted, zooming into Vera's homeworld, not a planet, but a fortress, its orbital defenses glowing like a nest of vipers. She wanted us here, close enough to her enemies for one good shot. Vex's hands shook as she pulled up the core's energy readings. The numbers were climbing, not in spikes, but in a steady, inexorable march toward critical. It's priming itself, she breathed. We're not the pilots, we're the payload. Outside, the black hole's gravity gnawed at the ship, time itself unraveling at the edges. The core's map pulsed, its crimson point hungrier than ever. It hadn't just chosen them, it had hunted with them, and now the trigger was almost pulled. The Iron Crown erupted from the black hole's shadow like a nightmare made real. Its hull scorched and warped from the tidal forces, but its weapons pristine, gleaming, and locked onto the Phoenix's crippled engines. Plasma bolts tore through the void, shearing off what remained of the starboard thrusters in a shower of molten debris. The impact threw Lira into the console, her vision swimming as Vera's face filled the viewscreen, her smile a razor slash of triumph. "Oh, little scavenger," she crooned, her voice syrup smooth. "Did you really think you were stealing the core? You were delivering it straight to the doorstep of its true purpose." Behind her, the Iron Crown's bridge crew moved with eerie precision, their hands flying across control panels that glowed the same sickly violet as the core's latest surge. "Annihilation," Vera whispered, savoring the word. "Clean, complete, deserved." Then the core screamed, not a mechanical whine, a biological sound, raw and furious, like a living thing recognizing the scent of its butcher. The entire ship convulsed, the warp core's casing cracking as blue-white energy lashed out, searing the bulkheads. Rook, barely conscious in his makeshift med bay, let out a wet laugh. "It hates her," he wheezed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Use that." Lira didn't hesitate. She wrenched open the core's access panel, her fingers brushing the exposed filaments where alien metal met something darker, something wet. The moment she made contact, the visions hit flashes of the derelict station's last moments, of Vera's ships harvesting core fragments from the ruins, of the thing inside the core waking to the sound of her voice. Not a weapon, a prisoner, and Vera hadn't just known, she'd provoked it. The Iron Crown's railguns charged, their barrels humming with lethal intent. Lira bared her teeth. "You want annihilation," she hissed, her voice lost in the core's rising howl. "Let's show her real fire." She jammed her palm into the core's heart. The universe tore in half, light bent, time stuttered. The Phoenix didn't jump, it recoiled, lunging backward through dimensions like a spider yanking its web. The Iron Crown's railgun volley passed through empty space where the ship had been, then curved, hunting the Phoenix's energy signature only to slam into Vera's own dreadnought as the core's rage rewrote the laws of momentum. Metal screamed, shields shattered, and as the Iron Crown's hull buckled under its own fire, the core's energy reached out one last time, not to destroy but to remember. It seared Vera's face into its memory, into its purpose. The trap had sprung, just not for the prey she'd expected. The Phoenix didn't just jump, it unmade itself. 1 second it hung in the void, bleeding atmosphere and defiance. The next, it was a streak of blue-white fury, the warp core's energy shearing through the Iron Crown's hull like a scalpel through rotten fruit. The dreadnought's armor vaporized on contact, its decks folding inward as the core's rage rippled through its skeleton, bending bulkheads into grotesque shapes. For a heartbeat, the Iron Crown simply pulsed, its outline distorting like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Then it collapsed, not in an explosion, but an implosion, matter crunching inward until nothing remained but a fist-sized singularity that winked out with a whimper. Inside the Phoenix, the victory lasted exactly 3 seconds before the core's casing split like an overripe melon. Dex lunged for the stabilizers, his hands skidding off panels gone molten with heat. "It's eating itself," he roared, veins standing out on his neck as the ship's light stuttered into darkness. "We can't control this." Lira didn't flinch. She braced herself against the core's housing, her palms blistering as she wrenched open the access panel. The thing inside wasn't humming anymore, it was shrieking, its light so bright it burned shadows into their retinas. She'd seen this before in the derelict station's dying echoes. The core didn't just want freedom, it wanted vengeance, and it would scorch the galaxy to get it. Vex grabbed her shoulder. "If it blows now, then we aim it." Lira snapped, her voice barely audible over the core's wail. Her fingers danced across the navigation console, inputting coordinates with a speed that bordered on delirium. Not toward a planet, not toward a star, toward the one place in the universe emptier than the core's hunger. The jump trigger didn't so much click as shatter under her grip. The Phoenix lurched, not forward, not backward, but sideways, into a dimension where physics had never been more than a polite suggestion. The last thing they saw before the light swallowed them whole was the core's energy lashing out like a dying star, not in destruction, but in release, its fury finally, mercifully spent. Somewhere in the chaos, Rook laughed through bloody teeth. Told you we should have painted it red. The Phoenix plunged toward the black hole like a bullet fired into a well, its engines screaming in protest as gravity's fingers pried at its hull. The warp core flared in response, its blue-white light twisting into jagged crimson tendrils that lashed against the ship's interior, not just resisting the dive but fighting it. Lira's hands trembled on the console, her vision doubling as the core's energy slithered into her mind, painting nightmares against her eyelids, flashes of a dying race, their bodies unraveling into light as they begged their creation for mercy. A chorus of voices, not alien but familiar, Rook's laughter, Vex's curses, Soren's last stand, all snuffed out mid-breath. It's not just afraid, Lira gasped, her voice raw. It's terrified, the core's pulse hammered against her ribs, its rhythm syncopated with her own heartbeat. It knew what waited in the black hole's maw. Not oblivion, nothingness, a fate worse than death for something that had never truly been alive. Rook didn't hesitate. He dragged himself upright, blood slicking his fingers as he grabbed the manual override lever. Then we go together, he snarled and yanked it hard enough to shear the metal. The ship lurched, its nose tilting like a diver committing to the fall. The core's scream split the air, a sound so visceral the crew clapped hands over their ears, but it was too late. The energy surge wasn't just in the wires anymore. It was in their bones, in the spaces between their thoughts, whispering one final, furious truth. The core had never been a tool, it had been a witness. A scribe recording every atrocity, every betrayal, every moment its creators had begged it to stop, and now it was showing them the same mercy they'd shown it. The event horizon yawned before them, a mouth with no bottom. The Phoenix's hull began to peel away in ribbons, atoms stretching toward infinity. Lira's last act wasn't to pray. It was to reach for the core's exposed heart, her fingers brushing its searing surface as the light swallowed them all. Somewhere beyond the screaming, beyond the unraveling, the core's final pulse echoed like a sigh. Not of surrender, of recognition. The black hole didn't just consume them, it listened. The escape pods jettisoned in a storm of emergency flares and static-filled goodbyes, tumbling away from the Phoenix as the black hole's gravity wrapped around the ship like a fist. Lira's pod spun wildly, giving her one last glimpse of the Phoenix, its hull cracking like an eggshell, the core's light boiling through the fractures before the view was swallowed by the void. Silence, then impossibly a ripple. Not the crushing oblivion they'd braced for, but a wave of shimmering blue energy that rolled outward from the event horizon, smooth as liquid glass. Space itself seemed to breathe, and in that breath, the Phoenix shuddered back into existence, its shattered plates knitting together like living tissue, its engines flaring to life with a roar that shook the pod's instrumentation. Gravity caught them hard, the pods slamming into Martian dirt like meteorites, kicking up plumes of rust-colored dust. By the time the hatches blew open, a crowd had gathered scavengers, rebel fighters, even a few wide-eyed corporate defectors, all drawn by the impossible sight of a ship reborn. Cheers erupted as Soren dragged himself free, clutching his ribs, and Vex flipped off the nearest camera drone with a grin. But Lira wasn't celebrating. She stood motionless in the wreckage of her pod, her eyes locked on the sky where the Phoenix now hung, gleaming and whole against the stars. The core was gone. The black hole had taken it, and yet a shadow moved at the edge of the crowd. A figure in a tattered lab coat, their face hidden beneath a hood. Lira's pulse spiked as they lifted a hand, pointing not at the ship, but at the horizon where Mars' twin moons hung like watchful eyes. The message was clear even before the figure melted back into the crowd. This wasn't salvation. It was a reprieve. Rook limped up beside her, his bandages soaked through. What now? He rasped. Above them, the Phoenix's engines hummed, waiting. Lira's fingers curled into fists. Now, she said softly, we find out what it left behind. The cheers around them faded as the crowd followed her gaze. to the ship, to the moons, to the faint, pulsing scar in the sky where the black hole had been. Space wasn't empty anymore, it was watching. The dust hadn't even settled over Vera's shattered empire before the knives came out. Warlords carved up her territories like vultures picking at a corpse, while rogue fleet captains turned their guns on each other in bids for power. But amidst the chaos, a handful of her most fanatical lieutenants weren't fighting for scraps, they were hunting for blood. The Rust Hawks became ghosts, moving between abandoned outposts and rebel safe houses, always one step ahead of the vengeful remnants of Vera's forces. Their reward for saving the solar system, a price on their heads so large even bounty hunters whispered it like a prayer. Then Dr. Elson found them. She arrived unannounced in a stolen medical frigate, her once pristine lab coat now streaked with engine grease and what looked suspiciously like blood. The scans she ran on Lira weren't gentle needles biting into skin, machines humming at frequencies that made teeth ache. When the results flashed across the screen, even Elson's usually steady hands trembled. The core didn't just die, she murmured, tracing the luminous patterns in Lira's DNA strands. It transferred, not all of it, just enough. Vex's grip tightened on her pistol. Enough for what? A flick of Elson's wrist sent the hologram spinning, revealing strands that pulsed in perfect sync with the Phoenix's residual energy signatures. Enough to call another one. As if summoned, the ship's comms array crackled to life without anyone touching the controls. The signal that poured through wasn't static, it was a voice, distorted but unmistakably alien, repeating 3 words in broken galactic common: "Come find us." The coordinates burned into the navigation console, led beyond the edge of known space, past the ruins of the derelict station, into a sector where star charts showed only emptiness. Soren exhaled sharply, another core. Rook, still pale from his wounds, managed a grin. "Told you the universe wasn't done with us." Outside the viewport, the first of Vera's revenge fleets dropped out of warp, their weapons flaring to life. Lira stared at her hands, where tiny blue fractures of light flickered under her skin like distant stars. The choice wasn't whether to run. It was whether to lead the hunters straight to the next nightmare or become something they couldn't follow. The Martian safe house smelled like old rust and recycled air, its walls vibrating with the distant hum of scavenger ships taking off from the red planet's makeshift docks. Inside, the crew sat in silence, their faces etched with exhaustion and something darker, the kind of weariness that came from staring into the abyss and feeling it stare back. Dex tossed a credit chip onto the table, the sound sharp in the quiet. "We could buy a moon with the bounties on our heads," he muttered. "Disappear." Live like kings, Vex didn't look up from cleaning her plasma cutter, or die like idiots when Vera's leftovers track us down. Then the floor shook. Not the tremors of a passing ship, something heavier, closer. The door slid open before anyone could reach for weapons, and there stood Lira, backlit by a glare so bright it made their eyes water. She didn't say a word, just jerked her thumb over her shoulder. Outside, the Phoenix hung in the dry Martian sky, but it wasn't the same patchwork scrap heap they'd barely escaped the black hole with. Its hull gleamed under the sun like liquid mercury, smooth and seamless where welds and scars had once been. Strange glyphs pulsed along its flanks in a rhythm that matched the crew's stunned heartbeats. Soren was the first to break the silence. "You rebuilt it." Lira's grin was all teeth. "Not me." She tapped the ship's new alloy plating and the glyphs flared blue. "The core left gifts. Turns out black holes don't just take, sometimes they give back." Rook limped forward, his bad leg dragging, but his smirk was back in full force. "So what's the play, Captain? More running?" Lira turned to face them, the ship's light painting her in stark relief. "We're not scavengers anymore," she said, voice low and sure. "We're pioneers." She tossed a holochip onto the sand between them. It flickered to life, projecting a star map. None of them recognized constellations twisted into impossible shapes, planets hanging where physics said they shouldn't. The core wasn't just a weapon, it was a map, and it's calling us home. Dex folded his arms. Home to what? The Phoenix's engines roared to life without a pilot, its new alloy singing in a frequency that made the dust rise in spirals. Lira didn't blink. To the ones who built it, Rook laughed loud and sudden and slapped the hull. Well, he drawled, when you put it that way. He hauled himself up the ramp, not waiting for consensus. One by one, the crew followed. The jump wasn't like before. No gut-wrenching tear through dimensions, no screaming metal. Just a single, smooth acceleration, the stars outside streaking into ribbons as the Phoenix carved through space like it was remembering an old dance. Behind them, Mars shrank to a rust-colored dot. Ahead, only the dark and the trail of starlight they left in their wake. Somewhere in the void, something stirred. And this time, it wasn't afraid. The Phoenix broke through the planet's atmosphere like a knife through silk, its new alloyed hull barely whispering against the friction. Below stretched a world that shouldn't have existed, lush emerald jungles interrupted by rivers so blue they hurt to look at, all framed by mountains that curved like beckoning fingers. But it was the ruins that stole Lyra's breath. Towering spires of the same alien alloy as the core rose from the vegetation, their surfaces etched with those same pulsing glyphs, as if the planet itself was whispering secrets to the ship. Settlers poured from the Phoenix's belly like ants from a kicked nest, their voices a cacophony of hope and disbelief. Children darted ahead, their laughter bouncing off the ruins as they slapped makeshift flags into the soil. Kova's promise, they called it before the landing gear had even cooled, a name that clung to Lyra's ribs like a weight. She didn't correct them. The hologram activated when her boot brushed a buried trigger plate. One moment she was kneeling in the dirt, tracing a glyph worn smooth by time. The next, the air before her rippled and a figure resolved from the light. Tall, too many joints, its elongated face carved with the same symbols as the core. Its voice wasn't sound, it was vibration thrumming through Lyra's teeth before the translator in her wristpad spat out the words, "You have passed the first test." Silence, then chaos. Settlers screamed, stumbling back from the projection. Soren's rifle snapped up, but Lira caught his wrist. The hologram didn't react. It simply raised a hand, and the ground beneath them shuddered. Deep below, machinery older than human civilization groaned awake, and the nearest ruin split open like a flower, revealing a staircase that spiraled into darkness. Vex's grip on her plasma cutter turned her knuckles white. "That's not a welcome mat," she muttered. "That's a trap." Lyra's pulse hammered in her throat. The core's remnants still flickered under her skin, warm and insistent. This wasn't just a colony, it was a proving ground, and whatever waited below those ruins. It wasn't going to ask nicely if they were worthy. The hologram's light pulsed in time with the groaning machinery beneath their feet, its elongated fingers tracing patterns in the air that resolved into star systems none of them recognized. When it spoke again, the voice wasn't just words, it was a vibration that made the fillings in Rook's teeth ache. "We seeded the cosmos with keys," it intoned, not to gift but to cull. The projection shifted, showing countless worlds swallowed by black holes, civilizations torn apart by cores they couldn't control. Lyra's skin prickled. They hadn't outsmarted death, they'd passed its audition. Dex's scoff was half laughter, half terror. "So we're what, top of the class?" The hologram's head tilted, a gesture almost human. "You are the first to survive." Behind it, the staircase yawned deeper, its walls thrumming with the same blue energy that now flickered under Lyra's skin. Soren's rifle stayed up. Ascend how? Light exploded from the ruins, painting the jungle in stark relief as the glyphs on the Phoenix's hull flared in response. The ship lifted without a pilot, hovering just above the treetops, its alloyed plates rearranging like living scales. The hologram gestured, not to the stairs but to the sky where the newly unlocked star map burned brighter. The cores were anchors, it said, tethering the unworthy. For the worthy, they are doors. A shudder ran through the ground as the ruins fully awakened, their spires splitting open to reveal cavernous silos beneath. Not for weapons, for ships, dozens of them, sleek and predatory, their designs echoing the Phoenix's new form. Rook limped forward, his bad leg forgotten as he whistled. "Looks like we're not the first to graduate." Lira's wristpad chimed, an alert from the Phoenix's scanners. The star map wasn't just pointing to another galaxy. It was counting down. Vex's fingers dug into Lira's arm. "That's not coordinates," she hissed. "That's an invitation." The hologram's eyes, too large, too dark, locked onto Lira's. The architects await. Then it vanished, leaving only the hum of the ships below and the creeping realization that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't outrunning light. It was being noticed. The orbital shipyards burned like constellations against the black, their skeletal frameworks swollen with half-built hulls. What had been whispers became a roar. Scavengers, engineers, even former corporate gunships now stripped of insignias, all welding together the bones of something impossible. They called them Phoenix class, though no two looked alike. Some were sleek as knives, their alloys scavenged from Vera's wreckage. Others bristled with jury-rigged cannons, their patchwork armor pockmarked by battles long past. But in every heart, pulsing behind layers of stolen shielding, rested a sliver of the original core. Not whole, not sentient, just hungry enough. Lira stood on the observation deck, watching the fleet take shape through the smudged plexiglass. Behind her, the new pilots fidgeted in their mismatched flight suits, Martian rebels with plasma burns still healing on their knuckles, Earthborn deckhands who'd never flown farther than Luna, even a few defectors from Vera's old legions, their uniforms hastily dyed black. They all wore the same expression, half terror, half thirst. She knew the feeling. "You're here because the universe forgot you," she said, her voice scraping raw from weeks of barking orders. The room stilled. They called us scrap rats, junk lords, the dregs who picked through the bones of a dead world. She tapped the glass where the first completed ship rotated lazily, its hull etched with glyphs that glowed faintly in the dark. "Now look at us," a murmur rippled through the crowd. The ship's markings weren't just decoration. They were a language, one the cores whispered in their dreams, spelling out paths through the void no human had ever sailed. Soren shouldered through the gathering, tossing a datapad onto the console. "Last diagnostics are green, more or less." The screen flickered with warnings even as he spoke. "Reactor stability, marginal. Warp alignment, theoretical." Lira smirked, "So business as usual." Outside, the fleet ignited its engines in unison, their combined light drowning out the stars. The jump coordinates glowed above the nav console, not a single destination, but a spread 100 branching paths into the unknown. The cores had chosen them. Or maybe it was the other way around. Vex's voice crackled over the comms. "They're calling us reckless." Lira thumbed the ignition. The deck trembled underfoot as the Phoenix's original hull, battered, proud, shuddered awake beneath them. "Funny," she said, "they called our ancestors that too. The jump wasn't clean, it never was. Space tore like wet paper, the fleet vanishing into the rift not as a unified armada, but as a storm, each ship carving its own wound in reality." Behind them, Earth and Mars hung silent, their wars and borders suddenly very small. Ahead, only the dark and whatever had been waiting for them all this time. The cosmic gateway yawned before them like a wound in the fabric of space, its edges shimmering with fractured light where the laws of physics unraveled and stitched themselves back together. The Phoenix hovered at the threshold, its new alloyed hull vibrating in sync with the gateway's pulse, less a ship now than a living compass attuned to the void's hidden frequencies. Behind it, the patchwork fleet fanned out, their engines humming in uneasy harmony. Lira's fingers hovered over the jump controls, the core's final warning clawing at her thoughts. Ascension demands sacrifice. Rook's hand clamped down on her shoulder, his grip firm despite the tremor in his fingers. "We've come this far," he muttered, his voice rough with weeks of recycled air and adrenaline. His reflection in the viewscreen was hollow-eyed, the blue fractures under his skin pulsing in time with the gateway's rhythm. Not exactly the retirement plan, huh? Outside, the gateway convulsed, its center darkening into a maw that swallowed light whole. Sensor arrays screamed static, not just from the distortion, but from something answering the fleet's approach. Lira's wristpad flickered with the last transmission from the ruins, a single glyph repeating like a heartbeat. Choose. Vex's voice crackled over the comms. If this is another damn test, it's not a test. Lira exhaled, watching the first scout ship vanish into the rift, its silhouette twisting like smoke before disappearing. It's a filter. The cores hadn't just judged civilizations, they'd pruned them, feeding the unworthy to the black holes and guiding the survivors deeper into the maze. And now the maze was opening its final door. Soren's hands tightened around his rifle. What's on the other side? The Phoenix's console lit up, star charts rewriting themselves in real time. Not coordinates this time, but names, etched in the same glyphs that adorned the ruin. Worlds, dozens of them. No, not worlds offerings. Lira slammed the thrusters forward. Answers. The fleet plunged in after her, their engines painting the void with flames as space folded around them like paper catching fire. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the screaming started, not from the comms, not from the crew, but from the gateway itself, a sound like reality tearing at the seams. And beyond it, something stirred. The moment the fleet pierced the gateway, every alarm on the Phoenix's consoles flatlined, not from failure, but from sheer irrelevance. Light stretched into impossible ribbons, stars smearing across the viewscreen like paint on wet canvas as the ships surged forward at speeds that made the old light barrier seem quaint. Then, as abruptly as the chaos began, it stopped. The universe exhaled. Before them stretched an expanse so vast it defied scale, not empty, but alive with structures that bent the eye in impossible ways. Towers of crystalline energy spiraled into infinities, their geometries shifting with each blink. Rivers of raw creation flowed between worlds that pulsed like living organs in some cosmic body. And woven through it all, threading the madness with chilling precision, were the same glyphs that adorned the Phoenix's hull. Then came the voice. It didn't crackle through comms or echo in their skulls. It simply was as fundamental as gravity. Welcome to the infinite. Lira's laughter rang out, bright and wild against the silence of the crew's oar. Guess we're not done yet, she breathed, her hand hovering over the throttle. Soren's grip tightened on his rifle, his knuckles white. That's an understatement. Vex's console lit up with a cascade of unfamiliar symbols. Ah, the ship's plotting a course. She squinted, somewhere beyond the infinite, apparently. Rook leaned back in his chair, staring at the impossible skyline. Oh good, more walking. The Phoenix surged forward without warning, the fleet accelerating in its wake. Not toward a destination, how could there be one, here, but into the unfolding itself, the universe rewriting its rules around them with each passing heartbeat. Behind, the gateway collapsed into a pinprick and vanished. Ahead, the horizon yawned wider, endless, singing a silent hymn of galaxies yet to be born. Somewhere in the chaos of light and laughter, Lira realized the core's pulse was gone from under her skin, not absent, just home, and finally, so were they.